Hello everyone, I'm Samantha Jane Smith.
And I'm Jacob Keynes, and you are listening to the Classical Queer Podcast.
Hello everyone. Before the start of today's interview, Jacob and I would like to take a few moments to wish everyone a happy Christmas and a good new year. We hope that 2023 will be a better year, not only for the queer community, but for people everywhere. And we stand with everyone that fights against hatred, whatever form it takes. Now, Jacob and I will be back in February 2023 with another interview with yet another fantastic member of the classical queer community. See you next year.
So today we are very, very thrilled to be joined by 4 members of Opéra Queens, which is a Montreal, Toronto-based, can I say collective? Is that a good word for
We're actually a federally incorporated nonprofit organization. So formally, but you can call us an opera company.
Fantastic opera company that does some wonderful queer opera, and so we're really excited to talk with everybody. As we usually do on the podcast, we'll go around and just kind of say a hello, a welcome, tell us about yourself. We'll start chatting. Maybe Mike, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to begin. I'm I feel like an accomplice or something. I'm the one who instigated this affair and have roped all these wonderful humans in. And I'm just glad that through all the craziness that we're all here together. It feels very surreal, but I'm the founder of Opéra Queens. We were founded in the fall of 2020. And a strange time to found an opera company doing so much stuff, but it just felt like the right time. And I'm Mike Van Fanzuming. I use they pronouns. And I'm currently based in Toronto, in Toronto, here in Canada. And at the time of founding Opéra Queens, I was finishing my master's at McGill University. So that explains kind of our Montreal origins. And we still try to serve both the Montreal and Toronto scenes and have artists that reflect both. And because there's it's pretty close geographically, and yet there is not as much cultural connection as I would like there to be. And I also perform in drag as Tanya's Mania and use she pronouns when I'm in drag. So that is one of the reasons why Opéra Queens was kind of founded, as an outlet for myself and other artists interested in gender bending and drag. And I work in a lot of different disciplines in opera. I was a pianist once upon a time. I have a prima degree. I work in theater as well and do lots of ruckus. So in the end, it all kind of intersects and also are their own kind of separate little entities as well too. And Opéra Queens essentially was founded to really serve the queer trans community as well as the BIPoC community and so we have even members today, I think really beautifully represents what we do, where we have those who are queer trans, we have those that are BIPoC, we have those that are both. And so it's a mélange, and we leave the door open for this kind of identity to present itself and to be present, as I say, reflecting the full color, the full rainbow, just beyond queerness as well too, because as a person of color who's queer, it's definitely, we want to have all those colors in the toolbox. And when we talk about queer trans narratives especially, sometimes the literal color part, the melanated part, is not always part of the discussion. So it's, and we don't want to say necessarily and out people who's who necessarily, everyone's at a different point in their journey, but it's just been really exciting to know that there are others like me out there and accomplishing wonderful, fun, crazy things together. So great to be here.
How wonderfully elegant. Very, very well put. Christina, maybe you want to say hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Yoon. I am a Korean-Canadian soprano from Mississauga, Ontario, which is just west of Toronto, aka the suburbs, if you have never been there. The reason why I say question mark is that I started off as a mezzo, but nobody really knew. It was always just mezzo soprano. For those who don't know anything about Fox at all, like FACH is what I said, is that mezzo soprano is kind of like the middle voice, right? And so I was a choir singer for a long time. And then suddenly my voice went through puberty without me. So that's why I was a mezzo soprano question mark for a very, very long time. And it also moved to soprano without me. I was in denial for a very long time, I think 2 months, when I was doing my master's in San Francisco. Um, and so my transition was to soprano was very arduous. But so even though I am somebody who identifies as straight, my pronouns are she, her, and therefore cisgender in my case, I am a huge advocate for, I say, the gay alphabet stories, because I don't remember the order after a certain point and I don't want to get it wrong. So I support the entire gay alphabet. I want to lift it up with my shoulders, and especially being fortunate to be in a community like San Francisco, like Toronto, like Montreal, where the gay community and beyond are just so rich and so supportive. But then once you step out of it, it's like people don't really know. And so I feel like something that I've talked about with Mike before is just the connecting the arts in general. It's like it's very tumultuous. It's changing as per we know the social climate with classical music, and classical art in general is changing. Like they're trying to cater to us almost 30-year-olds and beyond. We're like, finally. But, and so really having this vision of connecting these, what are still considered marginalized communities, with our classical art is a huge mission point of mine in my art, in my community engagement. And so when Mike contacted me a long time ago, we've known each other for a long time, to come join Opera Queens, it was obviously a immediate, let's do this.
I'm going to say, Jay, can you give us an intro? Tell us who you are.
Sure. So I am, as I said, I'm in Montreal. I had a very kind of circuitous route to Opera Queens. I I did a doctorate at University of Miami in the 2010s, and then moved back to Montreal after directing a kids choir for a while, not too sure what I was going to do next. And started working in audio engineering and music perception in a lab at McGill. And now I'm doing a PhD in psychoacoustics. But the first thing I did was vocal performance as an undergrad. So even though I have moved from music into music perception and experimental psychology, I still love to sing. And I am also super queer and super brown, so super happy to be hooked up with Mike and company, because I have, going back to when I was doing my master's and my DMA, I became really interested in issues of just the way women are treated in opera, the way people's bodies are discussed in opera, the way there's a lot of fat shaming even to this day. I literally read an article about it yesterday and was horrified because all these singers were talking about their eating disorders, and that's what I did my thesis on back in the 2010s, and I thought that things were getting better, but I guess not. And there have been so many singers, younger singers, because I'm obviously a bit older, who have talked to me about how hard it is, especially for women, to come out as queer in opera. People who have talked to me about the issues they've faced as BIPoC singers, and just there's a huge problem where women of color are often sort of facht as lower voices, even though their voices say soprano, but especially Black women, like if you look at Jessie Norman, Shirley Verrett, Grace Bumbry, they're all Zwischenfachs, and hey, guess what? So am I. So I started out as a coloratura soprano and was moved around all the time. Oh, something sounds strange. There's a darkness in your voice. You sound Black, whatever that means. And now, actually this season, 2022-23, all of my roles are not just mezzo. They're straight up contralto roles. And I'm like, whatever, I'm one of the lucky ones who gets paid to sing, but, I don't know. So I try not to sweat it too much and go where the wind blows me as far as that's concerned. but it's definitely a trend and has been for like decades. So yeah, that's my story. I like to write music. I like to create sound. I like to do multimedia. I like to do science. I like to do everything. And I have 3 bunnies and 3 kids.
And I believe...
Forgot.
Sorry, say that again?
I just always forget they, them pronouns. I always forget my pronouns. Bad non-binary person.
And I believe, just as I was looking everybody up before we started talking, I believe we're in the same program. Are you at Concordia in the Indie program?
I am. You too?
I am also doing the PhD in Indie.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's
and queer music. And so I have a music person and it's kind of a queer music geography, urban planning scenographies mix. And so I have one music person at Concordia, but the rest of them are non-musicians, which is really kind of funny as a musician.
That's so cool. I have Eldad Sabari and on my
Me too.
YouTube. Yeah, isn't he the best?
Love Eldad.
Me too. My main supervisor is in psychology in the hearing and cognition world. And then I have someone from psychoacoustics at UDM, Caroline Traube, who's amazing. And so Michael DeRoche is like super young and a professor in both psychology at Concordia and otolaryngology at McGill, which is really cool. Yeah, and he works with like hearing impairment mainly and deafness. But one of his projects was on vocal issues that people with hearing impairments and deafness experience. Just because when you can't, I guess, when you're not getting auditory feedback, sometimes you pick up vocal habits that actually can lead to like long-term vocal problems or make it difficult for your hearing family to kind of understand your affect and things like that. So he was working on that, and I got hooked up with him because of production questions, like muscular stuff. And anyways, it's just really cool. But I'm actually working on gender perception and voice timbre.
Very cool. Very, very cool. What a neat connect. It's a fun one. That's great. We should talk Concordia at some point.
I would love that.
And I love that Eldad's getting a shout out in this podcast. That's great. We'll be very thrilled. Sarah, let's see what our microphone situation is feeling.
Okay. I'm just getting a very, very big lag from you guys, but that's okay. I can deal with that. So many apologies for all the tech madness. I am actually sitting in the lobby of my building's gym, so, it's one of those days. My name is Thera. Thera as in therapeutic, as I like to say. I'm currently residing in Toronto, Ontario. It's so interesting listening to everybody else sort of speak about their experiences because there's so many parallels between, I think, so many of our paths that we've taken. So I also did my undergrad degree at Wilfrid Laurier, where I met Christina and Mike. Oh, I should mention my pronouns are she, her. I mean, they're obviously my name, but nobody is reading the podcast. That's not a thing. Anyway, did my undergrad at Laurier and then did my master's at the University of British Columbia, which was interesting. Then I did my artist diploma at the Glenn Gould School here in Toronto. And this is where I find myself now. So I had an interesting, I think we've all sort of had interesting vocal journeys. I'm a coloratura soprano now, allegedly, but I was in weird mezzo land for 2 years, which was just not right. I think we figured it out now, but I think along with the vocal struggles, I should also mention that I'm half Sri Lankan, and it's a very interesting career when half the time that you're working with new people or being in a new production or going to different places and whatnot, people are asking you where you're from. Love that experience. And while I know that I look pretty white passing, and I certainly don't, well, according to other people, don't look Sri Lankan, that also has its own set of challenges because people want to sort of tell you where you're from. And that kind of isolation or feelings of sort of non-belonging sort of amplified in an artistic community can be especially isolating, because I feel like artists themselves are people who kind of want to find their own group, and creatives like us often feel just in general that we don't belong, and then we strive to find belonging in our art, and then when we can't do that because of perceived differences that other people have of us, it's extremely lonely, and it's isolating, it's debilitating, and it's companies like Opéra Queens that bring these more marginalized demographics together and make safe spaces actually safe. Because how many times have we heard, oh, this is a safe space, from somebody who doesn't really understand what that means? And then it turns out that it's not. Anyway, I'm just really excited to continue my work with Opéra Queens. I'm also on the board of directors. I'm also acting as the secretary for Opéra Queens, and really happy to be exploring my journey with a lot of like-minded people. I identify as straight and cisgender, but that being said, kind of like Christina with, supporting the entire alphabet, that's also really, really important to me as well, because I mean, so many people who work in our industry are LGBTQ+, and you want to support your friends, you want to support your colleagues, you want to learn how to be a better ally, and really work on what it really means to have a space that is truly safe and inclusive for everybody. So that's my spiel.
Wonderful. Thank you. I mean, maybe my first question for everybody is the most obvious one. And I'm sure anybody who works with Opera Queens gets this all the time, but opera is such a narrow, white, classical, non-queer, very, very queer, but not presenting as queer on paper necessarily, way of making art and music. And I wonder, I mean, probably knowing what a lot of people are going to say, but this is the important thing. Like, what does Opera Queens mean to you as performers then, that you get to, not to put words in anybody's mouth, but like subvert all that to encounter opera from this perspective that is so wonderful and queer and diverse?
Well, I'll quote a review that we had from our show Tiny Secret in August that I really love from Opera Ramblings blog. And it was something that articulated very well that it was surprisingly unsurprising, which is exactly what I didn't realize what I hoped I would accomplish. But, when I present on my CV or I say that I do, opera and drag, people are like, really like, wow, it seems like so revolutionary because, opera, it has such a stodgy, elitist, connotation still. And then, drag brings in this kind of whole seeming like disjointed other subversive thing, which of course is also what we hope. But Carabino is one of the most performed roles. Orlovsky, there's so many pants roles for mezzo and no one questions it. The whole thing that we're trying to really pull apart is that it exists already in the art form, and it is such an overdramatic, campy art form. What else is more gay than that? But it's just really actually doing what is not often done, because I think a lot of us, as we kind of introduced it, felt really honestly like, as Opera Queens often seems, like a support group for us marginalized folks. It really is kind of a form of therapy and a kind of a form of reckoning with this art form, because so often things are done in certain spaces for certain people, but not others. Our whole point is to bring the rest of the rainbow back in, So drag, but, for example, I sing Carmen and Tatiana. It's like, why not? If a mezzo gets to sing Carabino and Octavian, why not? And, for some of the others of us, we haven't been seen people of color, especially in certain roles and repertoire, and as an Asian, I'm not going to just sing, Butterfly. I'm not just going to sing, Kalaf and Turandot. How many Asian Carmens have we had? And why are so many of those mezzos singing Suzuki, right? There's just so many things where it's really just actually seems revolutionary, but really it's just catching up to where all the other art forms are, film, music, theater, and all sorts of other media where it's happening. It's just opera often move very slowly. So surprisingly, I've really found things have moved very quickly for us. We've gotten a lot of support and granting, not as many tomatoes as I thought, because I think we're at a point finally where this is starting to be normalized and started to really be accepted after many centuries of it not being so. And it really is the time, because a lot of us has just been waiting out there for it to happen. The other key component is, commissioning new work, which we've done and continue to do. I always thought it would be something really down the line, but we've been really fortunate to have really creative composers linked with us very early on. And I think, Jay, after all of the amazing things you mentioned in your bio, I think you also actually forgot to say that you compose, or maybe I forgot to mention it. But Jay also is an incredible composer, and we have a commission, our first Opera Queens commission for them, which has already actually seen some light, but will continue to be developed next year. So it's really thrilling also just creating new work that needs to speak. And that's another part of the conversation too, because as much as we love the canon and we can do things with it, it is limited in some ways because, for example, me as a queer Asian, non-binary Asian who does drag, where are my roles, where's my repertoire? It's a story that exists, but something that hasn't really gone into opera. And so many of us, as we mentioned, don't see ourselves reflected in this art form. So that's what I'd like to say about it. I've lots to say about it, but that's why I'm here.
Anybody else?
Sure. It's really interesting for me. I've kind of been a bit oblivious to the outside world in a lot of ways. I'm actually two of my children have been sent for autism diagnoses, and I'm actually going next. And so I cannot say with a degree of certainty at this point that what they're going to say at the appointment, but the autism community is really in favor of self-diagnosis anyways. So, and that, if you, but yeah, all that to say, I've been a bit oblivious to some of the things that other people have noticed, and but I'm very sensitive to it. So when people come in and talk to me about the problems they've faced, either as disabled singers, neurodiverse singers, singers of color, queer singers, I find it really painful. It feels like it's terrible. Opera is one of the first places where I saw blackface on stage, and for a Black person to encounter that, I mean, I almost quit because I said, well, I don't want to be involved in something where blackface is it's like the final frontier of blackface. Like, why is it still acceptable? And I was actually in a production of Mikado way back when, and I just feel like, ugh, gross, and it's a weird world. And when I heard about Adrian Angelico, their agent or manager, I can't remember, being worried that when they showed up to do a Rosencav, people would be like, oh, we don't want a man playing Octavian because it's going to unqueer Rosencav. And I'm like, a trans person in the cast is unqueering the show? It's like, what planet am I on? Like, you're going there to consume this like lesbian show, but then you don't want to see trans people on stage. And people boycotted Les Foluettes when it came to Montreal because they didn't want to see like gay men on stage like cavorting with each other. And I'm like, but you've been consuming this forever. That's kind of like why you go there, right? To look at gay stuff but pretend you aren't. So it just it's really just kind of nice to be open about it, and like, you know, that there are companies now that you can talk to and say, look, you know, I have limited mobility. Can we try to make sure that this production takes that into account? Can we make sure that audience members with limited mobility are considered? Because that's a problem too. Can we, you know, and it's just, maybe we haven't solved all these problems, and maybe we aren't going to be able to on our own. Maybe we need a bunch of these kind of companies, but at least we can have the conversation. At least we can talk about what it's like to be neurodiverse or have limited mobility and be on stage. At least nobody at Opera Queens is going to look at my body and say, you know, you need to lose 40 pounds before we'll cast you as such and such, because I've seen that written into singers' contracts, and it's just appalling because, hey, we're suspending disbelief and believing that, you know, gods are coming down to earth and like having sex and making babies with humans, but we can't believe that a fat person would fall in love. Like, that's just, no, you've gone too far. Like, what is this? Come on.
Yeah, jumping onto that, like just the suspending belief thing. One of my favorite things about combating like what people think of the opera industry, which is like super Eurocentric forward, kind of the older generation, super hoity-toity, entitled, all those very not nice compliments. My favorite thing to do is to sing for donors and big names, because generally as a bigger plus sized Asian person, but just because I am Asian, again, I am Korean Canadian, is that they kind of expect like a small voice, because statistically and in the past, people who become classical singers in the Eurocentric way are very small, thin women, right? And then the men, they don't care because, oh, hold on, it's re-recording. Wait. Oh, and they don't care about the men's bodies because the patriarchy, right? But my favorite thing to do, because I have quite a large voice and it's rounder, it's not dark per se, but it's not light, you know? And so my favorite thing to do is just watch their entire perception of what is life just flash before their eyes. They don't know what to do because I'm born in Canada. I'm a second generation Korean immigrant. I don't have any accent when I speak Korean or when I speak English. They don't have translating accents. So seeing these donors, patrons, ticket holders, etc., who have maybe that more older mindset, it's just so funny to watch them just question their entire life. Do you know what I mean? And so one thing I really like about companies like Opera Queens, like there's a small number of companies who have like the same umbrella goal of what we want to see for the future, but not many. And it's like Jay was saying, like, this is why, like, jumping off that point, like, you would never hear that kind of question of, like, where are you from? Like, people will just tell you if they want you to know. Or, like, if you, like, in this case of Jay, I hope it's okay to share that Jay had twisted their ankle or something happened to your ankle. It was really bad. And they had to use a cane. And our director was like, yeah, no problem. You one of the characters was a nurse, and I was like, let's just add it like a limp, you know? It was just like so easy. And I know that mobility is specifically as an issue, I say with quotes, is sometimes directors are like, what do I do with this? Whereas the director we have for Eugene Onegin was just like, you have a cane? No problem. Now it's part of the character, you know? And I think it's that very, because it was not a big deal. It was not nonchalant, like, oh, whatever, but it was just really taking into account each person, like, whatever accommodations you needed, as long as there were like accommodations, not just like demands, you know, like accommodations, they were always, well accounted for. And that's something that is very, very different from the old mindset of the opera world, which is like my way or the highway. Like, we have this dress from 1926 and we want you to fit those measurements. And if you don't, you don't. If you don't, you're fired. And that's completely unrealistic. Some places are still using blackface. Some places are still using yellowface. And on the account of like not being okay with different people or different folks or different pairings, like something that I wanted to mention was that like especially with this Onegin production we just did, it just felt like Mike had brought up, it just felt so normal, you know, like I played Lenski, which is traditionally a tenor role. I didn't change a single note. I just sang in the soprano octave. Olga remained the same, you know, and so we were love interests, and you know, because there's plenty of lesbians in the world, right? Plenty. And so why not see a lesbian couple have just a good old love hate mental breakdown on stage, just like every other couple that's out there, you know? And so I think what Mike had mentioned, like the normalcy of LGBT couples, people who of differing pronouns and identities and abilities, just normalizing all of it is one of the really cool things that is appearing now. And Opera Queens is one of those people is like, hey, here it is. And so it's, I think that's what gets people upset on a larger scale, but we all have to start somewhere.
I just want to give a shout out actually to Lakeshore Light Opera in Montreal, because I walked in to audition with my cane, and they're a very traditional Red Book Gilbert and Sullivan company. And the stage manager immediately said, if you cannot wear the character shoes, if you need the cane, if we have to change the dance numbers, you let us know. And so I'm doing a little better. I have a brace and I'm trying my best, but it is so comforting to know that they like my voice and they like my acting, and they will change whatever they have to change, and they will dress up a cane for me in period style if need be. So I do want the world to know that, you know, some mainstream companies and some traditional companies are doing what they can to accommodate people and to even diversify the cast. The stage manager told me that she's been in the company since the 80s, and she's seen, pardon me, a huge shift in just the acceptance of, you know, diverse people of all types, you know, to being welcomed into the company and cast in main roles. So I'm really happy. And we actually have an Asian tenor as one of the romantic leads in the show. So hooray! And I'm playing the Duchess. So it's a pretty diverse cast with all kinds of people and all kinds of things going on.
And I have to mention as well too, you know, speaking of Jay's iconic nurse with Kane, it really was on that Friday night of our opening night that really did steal the show. People really loved your character, and I mean, you're an incredible actor, and that's something that we know from all of our productions, but that one really showcased it, and it wasn't the humor of the cane, it was just the way you used it, the way you physicalized it, the way it was an extension of yourself. And at the same time, I really feel like what I've noticed in that circumstance and other times is when we really actually free people and allow them to be themselves in their totality, it allows them to reach an artistic level that is so much deeper and farther than if we set limits and we say, you can't do this, you can't do that, you are, you know, too light, too heavy, whether it's vocally, physically, or you're too gay, you're too brown, you're too, you know, whatever it is, you know, that those all clamp down on us, especially as singers who use a physical instrument. And when we free ourselves and free each other to be ourselves as who we are, I've really seen, it's really astonishing what we can witness, because I know Jay's work and everyone else's work I admire, but seeing that in action, seeing how that freedom can be so exciting and invigorating, that's why we do what we do. And speaking of that moment, it was just something that I really firsthand witnessed, and it was like, well, that's what we do. We're always so pleasantly surprised, and hopefully that is a message to spaces that are doing that work and spaces that aren't doing the work to either continue or start to be more inclusive, because imagine all the incredible art that can be created when we free ourselves, free each other, you know, whatever it may be, whatever.
Yeah, and there was a lot of patience extended towards me from everybody in the cast, because I flew in the day rehearsal started, and so I missed the first day, and I was coming from a different time zone, and I had been in like 3 or 4 different places within a 1-month period, and had re-injured this chronic problem with my ankle. So I was in really bad physical shape. And when I arrived, the first day that I was singing, it was like I had never seen the score. I don't know what happened. It was just, it was too much to come in that much pain, having traveled and sing. And and everybody was nice about it. Nobody yelled at me. I didn't get fired. They waited to see what I would do in the next couple of days. And sure enough, everything was fine. And I was completely off book. But if they had judged me by that first day, instead of just having a little bit of grace and a little bit of patience, and a little bit of understanding that I was like in tremendous stress because I had this ankle and this cane I didn't know how to use, and I was coping with all of that. It's amazing what people can do also when you approach them with compassion instead of like threat, which I think we've all seen or faced ourselves in opera school or out in the world. And it doesn't help. It doesn't make people better. Compassion makes people better.
Compassion makes people better. Too true. I think the interesting thing, and we preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but we all work in this world of representing the human experience through some sort of art form, be it opera as like a highly elevated, really heightened version of that, but like all forms of like art and music making. And it's always been so frustrating and funny to me that we, as people who do this experience, who talk about human lives, are so rigid about like the people who are telling these stories. They're so rigid about the people who are walking in to portray that on stage. And so it's so refreshing to hear when anybody has this experience, whether it's walking into Lakeshore and the person says, yes, we can move with that, we can adapt with that, or a character is not rigid. The experience of the character is not defined by the gender or sexuality or where you may or may not hold like a traditional cultural background to. Like, we can move that. We can have that same narrative happen genuinely and honestly and bring that forward through any number of voices that can possibly happen. And it's just so wonderful to hear Opera Queens doing this work. And so I think we should listen to something first before we continue talking. So maybe we'll start with some Carmen, because why not? Let's listen to some Carmen. And so you had sent over a Bien from Carmen, the final duet. And so without further ado, here is our final duet.
Ou laissez-moi passer.
tell me more about the production process for Opera Queens, because it's such a maybe different way of approaching opera. Although Jay, I firmly, I love the line. I will completely butcher what you said, but you go to opera to encounter something gay without knowing or saying that it is. That we all have been going to opera for generations to have a little gay festivity, and then whether or not we actually want to admit that is a different conversation. But I'm assuming your production process is maybe a little different from the maybe older, more tightly wound opera company. Can you tell me about how you approach things?
Sure, I can just give a little perspective from the kind of the bird's eye view. And I think I always realized I had a little bit more of this kind of producer mindset, because it really is a different kind of way of seeing the world. And I think it maybe comes from my perspective starting out as a pianist and not starting out as a singer, because even the nature of what a pianist does is dealing with multiple lines, for example, Bach's polyphony, and you're dealing with multiple voices. And I think I've just always been very eclectic that way and very polymathic. And so it's been a really great outlet for me to be able to channel that energy and to put that kind of perspective into something where, we paint on a bigger canvas. I don't conduct, but I guess it's as close as I might get to it, where you're working outside of yourself and you're picturing something that starts bigger than ourselves. And of course, one of the, as exhausting and demanding as it does, because we have been very fortunate with grants that do account for a lot of the admin work that I do. A lot of it, I end up putting a lot of my own energy and time into things. So as demanding that is one of the great privileges, that I also get to think, what do I want to do? What are the roles that I want to sing? So it often starts there, but I also think, what can we find that can tell a story where it's not just me and not just my body and my voice? And so it often starts with kind of, when we started very early on, we had a smaller group and we thought, what do we all want to sing? And I kind of fabricated productions that kind of incorporated those narratives. So the Carmen, for example, came from a production called Latin Night that I'm very excited will finally premiere in 2023. It's the first time I'm actually able to say I have a proposed release date of June 12th, 2023. It's actually the anniversary. I haven't told anyone yet, even none of you, Jay, for example, who was in that show. But it's the anniversary of the Pulse tragedy in Orlando. And this production actually came by because, of course, we were very interested in Carmen. But also there was a member of our cast who comes from a Latinx background who suggested this composer that wrote this opera about someone losing a loved one in the Pulse tragedy. And just thinking of the violence that Carmen has in this show too, and for me is a role that kind of really brought me to drag, actually, the opera Carmen and the role of Carmen. And it's so chilling, kind of what I've been watching the footage back loads of times, and tweaking it and working with our production crew, to kind of finalize everything. And, watching it's very chilling because I see myself very much as a trans woman, and seeing a trans woman be a victim of violence. We think of all those queer trans people that are, that have violence acted against them. So we paired these two works were really the center of that production to really highlight the community of the story that needed to be told, and to kind of really draw parallels between both the past and the present. And something I really love to do is at Opera Queens is to reinvent our canon works, but also new works. So how can we knit them together? Because I think often we think, oh, okay, there's the standard canon works, there's the new works, and they have their own places. They may coexist in a season, but the canon works will be really big and splashy. We'll devote more money to them, and they'll be our main stage. Then we'll take that money, we'll fund these little new works because we have to, because they're whatever. But the whole thing is that all of these stories are stories that deserve to be told. And why can they not coexist? Because we all live in this time together. But we have all this wealth of repertoire, so how can they coexist? So this was how our Carmen came together, and we've also done Carmen in different contexts, mixed and matched repertoire. Oftentimes we kind of do a cabaret format where we put repertoire together that kind of coexists well or tells a certain narrative arc. And Yegan was the first time we've done a show end to end, although with twists as well too. And so often it comes from finding stories that we feel haven't been told or haven't been told well, haven't been seen in a certain way, and finding connections between the past and the present, and finding opportunities where the most of us possible can be part of it. So I might sing Carmen, but for example, in These Wings Are Meant to Fly, which is the new work we paired it with, I was part of the text message chorus. And then vice versa, there were people that had a lead role elsewhere, and then another piece were in a secondary role or in a chorus role elsewhere. And, trying to make it a way where everyone can have a moment to shine, especially as us soloists, we're so used to having ourselves, subjugated in some way. So it's nice to be able to have a more soloist-centric approach, and at least also still have ensemble work where we can have some singing together and some bigger scenes, but really focusing on stories and sharing that kind of spotlight. And for me, I've enjoyed a lot of success and interest in my drag work, but I kind of want to take that and then turn it and then shine it on other folks. And it's just been so exciting seeing everyone else kind of really take that limelight and see what they do with it, and hopefully in turn use that and shine that on other places. So that's kind of my perspective, and wearing all the hats, performing and producing it. And it's a lot, but I'm a lot too. And that's why I end up doing it. And it's been great because now as we've been moving forward, we've been able to outsource. And for example, Thera has been really great on the administrative side to really get more involved in that capacity. And it's really important to have a really strong behind the scenes team that is not always so appreciated, but really vital to everything you see on screen, on stage.
Fantastic. I mean, I think, I'm just jealous that not jealous. I can't wait to see a production sometime. Right now, I'm just excited to hopefully be in a city and see you all work. This is great. We should listen to another thing. So maybe we will go to, maybe you can tell us about Lady of Ladies a bit before we have a listen. Maybe Christina, you want to tell us about Lady of Ladies? You seem very, very excited.
I think that Jay should tell us because it's their work. I was just so happy to do it. I'm just excited. I think Jay should talk about it.
Sure. So Mike had a ton of faith in me and said, "Hey, want to write something for Opera Queens?" And I was like, yeah, of course I do, but didn't think that it was actually, but because it took me a while to use the word composer and feel comfortable saying that. I still don't know if I do, because I have these friends who they have PhDs in composition and they're amazing, and I love to work with sound. And I did a lot of sort of sound crafting in audio school, but the word composer kind of scares me anyways. But I had started writing this opera about Claude Cain and Marcel Moore, who were non-binary surrealist artists, and I'm still, I kind of shelved that, but I do want to finish it. And then I did this other thing for Rise Opera with Eldad, which ended up getting more attention than I expected. So Mike asked me to write something Cleopatra themed, and I found this really cool E.E. Cummings poem and decided to use that as my starting point. So the poetry in this particular chunk is by E.E. Cummings from a poem called Cleopatra Built. And I've split up the text between the women in Cleopatra's life rather than kind of focusing on Antony or Caesar, because, every opera about Cleopatra and every discussion about Cleopatra focuses on Antony or Caesar. So that's the difference with our our Cleopatra that was commissioned. And we've got Sarah and Christina and Mike and who else is singing in it? I'm so sorry.
It's just because Corinne's not here today. Oh, too many C names. No worries.
Sorry, Corinne.
Well, let's have a listen. So as we kind of wrap up, I am always curious where organizations are going next. And so maybe, I mean, I my partner always says don't mention COVID, but we have to. In this period where we are now kind of adapting and moving forward and seeing what we are able to do and all that kind of thing. Given that you started in 2020, at the worst possible time to start a performance based organization, what are you hoping to do now? What I mean, in Montreal and Toronto, things are pretty decent for performance at the moment. What are your next productions? What's on the slate?
So I'll talk a little bit about what's kind of coming up. And because we have such a wealth of creativity, we have no shortage of ideas, and which is great. So, and I'm a long-term planner, so I kind of have like 2025, possibly to 6, 7 mapped out, and there's still more ideas that past that. We have decades of, work that we can do. So we really hope to, go the distance, because I think there's so many exciting stories for us to tell, but also hopefully others will be telling those stories too, and it goes beyond us. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because it seems weird as a performing arts company to start in the pandemic, but it was kind of great too, because we had to be creative and adaptable and find a way to make things work in the worst possible times. So it's almost like now that we have that, we everything else will be piece of cake. It, of course, isn't. But it's kind of great too, because then we're really mindful of health and safety moving forward and cancellations. So we always try to double cast productions with a cover as well, if possible. And our Negin production was our biggest production yet, probably will be for a while this past summer. And we really tapped into that system because in some cases we had to look into our plan B, C, and even find a D because all of them were challenged. So that's something that has really impacted kind of the way we work in a way that hopefully plans for illness to happen. And now as we're returning and with a lot of mask mandates not present, there's also just regular illnesses and flus that are also disrupting people. So that's one consideration in terms of our live work. At the same time, we started doing a lot of digital work. One of our big digital productions, our first big grant from Canada Council, which was a $50,000 Digital Now grant, ended up allowing us to do 2 digital productions. And we filmed that in summer 2021. And I kid you not, I've been working on it every month since it's finally will be releasing Drama Queens in February, which will be our a release date I planned of February 23rd, 2023. Easy to remember, but also Handel's birthday, who features in the show. And as I mentioned, our Latin night production, June 12th of 2023 in memoriam of Pulse. And so those will finally actually see the light of day because we've done it, we've been working on it, and we're excited to share that. But a real emphasis on digital work that can access people internationally, not just in Toronto and Montreal, but really valuing our audiences all over the place, because especially so much with queer, trans people, gay people, not everyone's living openly or able to where they are. And so it's really important for us to be able to reach people in terms of accessibility and to have a place where they can indulge in their own time, in their own space. Because when you go to a show, you out yourself, in a lot of ways, or as a performer as well too. And we want to continue to have that kind of space. And there are places like in China where there's still, 0 COVID lockdowns. And even if people are pretending COVID is done and COVID is fine, it hasn't gone away. And I think a lot of companies are really quick to return in person, which is great. And we love that. But there is such value in online digital work and tremendous. It's actually a lot more difficult in a lot of respects. And I have such a huge respect for people in film and TV because it is so demanding. So we're going to continue that work where we can still reach our online audiences. Our Tanya's Secret show that we're recording, I'm working on for digital release so that we can have that also air and serve people that are part of our online following. And we have a grant in the bank from Canada Council again for a public outreach grant, which, as Jay was mentioning, is for our Night of 1,000 Cleopatras production. So this will feature Jay's opera Cleopatra Built, which will be completed by then in whatever form it takes, because we have some scenes so far, and it's still a work in process, and it will be accompanied in our traditional way by Canon Works, kind of knit together, where we have the Barber, Handel, Massenet, some well-known versions of Cleopatra, some lesser-known versions kind of existing side by side, and that's something we're really excited about. In 2024, we're planning for a Sodom and Gomorrah show, which will tackle religion, which is a big topic for the gays and for just really all of us, people of color too. And that will be spicy and is something I've been kind of waiting to do because that's definitely kind of loaded. And then aiming for the 25 season, I have been working on a book and an opera about my life called Memoirs of a Gaysian. So that's something that's still in a very early process. But again, speaking earlier before as, where are my stories? Well, we are going to create them. So that will be something that will be very personal project to me, but will also reflect a lot of the stories and the people that are part of Opéra Queens. And we hope the world that will see themselves reflected. So there's lots of things happening, and there are a lot of things that have happened. And we have a lot of archival stuff already out on YouTube and our social media. But stay tuned. We want to continue to be there in person, but also digitally, and just hopefully inspire people also to go out and do their thing as well too. But definitely lots to share coming up. Whether you're in our city or if you're not, there's a way to get connected and to be part of our work.
I mean, the two things I love about, many things I love about that, but the two main things that I love about it, I am such a believer in like canon repertoire, and there's this rallying cry that people seem to have decided on, that if we're doing new repertoire, new stories, new things, that for some reason it means we are axing all of the other stuff. And I don't know where that comes from, but we can do both. That's just more opera. That's just more performance. And I think that's phenomenal, you know? So I love that Opera Queens is doing these blended, new commission, absolutely bringing new voices, and also the old productions in a new and fun and interesting and beautiful way. The other thing that I really love about what you're talking about digital creation is that I think for some of us who live and breathe queer performance and live and breathe being a queer person without very much masking involved, I absolutely take for granted that I can go to whatever performances my little gay self wants to go to, and not think about it. And it is super important to have a resource for people who are not in that position to go and see queer performance in all of its different forms in the way that they are able to consume it. And so it's nice to hear that that's a consideration that you're thinking of, that there's a method for people to engage with your work that doesn't necessarily include outing them, or that they can do it at their own comfort level or space or wherever they're able to meet that production, and how important it is for them to be able to meet that production in the space that they're able to. And so that's phenomenal to hear. I'm really quite happy. Everybody can find you at, I believe your website's just operaqueens.ca. Am I correct?
You bet. The key is to find something easy and memorable. So I'm sorry it wasn't taken. I mean, I was really adamant that it was .ca to represent the Canadian side. But I'm really just thrilled that it wasn't taken. I have to say, though, on Facebook, we are Opera Queens with a Z. I'm going on that link because it's taken, but it's not a public page, and I've been monitoring. If it ever comes with an S up, I'm grabbing it. So that's a little bit of an Easter egg for those that are really keen. But yeah, operaqueens.ca or at Opera Queens is our hand.
Did I just
fantastic
about canon repertoire? Because that was a big thing that came up, and this is something that I talk about whenever I can, because I think it's really important. But Don Giovanni, for example, Carmen, which we've talked about, these shows have a ton of violence in them and highlight things like domestic violence, rape, and some people have said, well, we shouldn't perform those shows because it's just terrible what happens in them. But I mean, when we look at what has happened recently with all the like Me Too stuff in Hollywood, I think that Don Giovanni is a really relevant show. It doesn't matter that it was composed in, the 1700s. It doesn't matter. These things are still happening to people. So my big thing is like, yeah, let's do these shows, but let's point out the things in them that are terrible and that are still happening to people. Let's not just all come out of the theater humming, Finca del Vino, do 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 do. That was great. What a fun show. Like, let's say, yes, there's some great music in there, but also this highlights how powerful charismatic men who could get any woman they want also still rape women when women say no. So it's like, and people are baffled by this, right? Like, how could that powerful man who had a beautiful wife, he would never rape someone? He has a beautiful wife. Well, yes, he would. And we know he would. And we see this all the time. And this is exactly what happens in Don Giovanni. So why are we not using these operas to show these things? And like Mike said earlier, the idea of Carmen, just in its historical version, already highlights spousal abuse, but the idea of also showing the murder of a trans woman on stage, for me, was like a huge thing, and it was very, very hard for me to play that role. My wife is trans, and I had a lot of emotions, but I just felt really, really, really strongly that it was an important thing to show. And this is the first time we're actually like articulating these things publicly. But I think it's amazing. It's amazing to be around people who let me also bring my kind of academic and activisty thoughts into the space, because if I went off to a mainstream opera company and was like, "Excuse me, but can we talk about rape now? Because Don Giovanni," and they would just be like, "Be quiet, you're wasting company time." So it's just really nice. It's a really nice way to do canon rep.
I think I go ahead, Mike.
No worries, no worries. You go first. I just wanted to make sure that there has been having some trouble. So after your point, just wanted to pass it on to Thera to just say as much as possible about anything that they have experienced or felt, because there's been like a lag. So just wanted to make sure that she had some time.
Yeah, Thera, any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't really know what the question was because I haven't been here for so long. I'm so sorry. My internet, I'm back in my apartment. I have proper internet. There's no one making weird noises on the treadmills anymore. This is kind of a throwback, but the question I think that you might have been talking about before was sort of what the process is for sort of making an Opera Queens show. Mike sort of alluded to the admin side of it, and from when we were doing Onegin, that was sort of our first, if I'm correct, our first like fully staged full production, and we put out an audition form for it, and I was sort of in charge of helping out with responses to people who auditioned, et cetera, et cetera. But the form itself was so interesting and so well constructed, I think. So kudos to you, Mike, for putting that together, because not only was it sort of what is your musical experience, like all of the standard questions of like, here's what we would like you to submit for a video or for a sound recording, but it was also sort of like, what are your accessibility needs? Which I think companies are starting to ask, but often it's just kind of like phrased as more of anything else we need to know. And anytime that's on an application form, like, I don't know what that means. Like, thank you for reading my application, I guess. Like, is that what you wanted to hear? But it was questions like, very specific questions about accessibility, about what your other strengths and skills and interests are, about what you wanted to be involved with, whether it was from a singing perspective and or any other sort of production perspective, whether it be social media or arts admin or playing another instrument or what have you. So it was a really well-rounded application form that was addressing all of these things, and also addressing like, do you identify as LGBTQ plus, or do you identify as BIPoC or anything on that sort of demographic as well. And it wasn't phrased in like token diversity way. It was an application form that I had never really seen before. And I think the process of filling out that form and really sharing you as a whole person on an application is something that is very new and shouldn't be new, but is a really, really good way of going about doing that. So I apologize if I'm sort of jumping back to a previous question, but I wasn't here. I wouldn't know. But it seems like things are working a lot better technologically on my end. So that's my little spiel of what I wanted to say when my internet was not like.
They are working quite well, and even though it's a little bit of a throwback, it's all connected. This is all part of the same conversation, and so I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And it just speaks to that we are able to and provide nice models of continuing classical performance through new lenses, and Opera Queens provides a really good framework for how to do this, for how to do canon repertoire, for how to commission new things, for how to include people in these spaces that are so very often excluded, and if they are in the space, it's often a very violent experience for many people. And so it's nice to hear from everybody that this is what you are able to do, that this exists, that we are able to do this work thoughtfully and inclusive of people. And it's been very, very nice to talk with everybody. Mike, Christina, Thera, and Jay, thank you so much for joining us here on the Classical Queer Podcast. We're going to leave you, dear listeners, with a couple more tracks from Opera Queens. But please go find them if you are in Eastern Central Canada. If you're in Montreal, Toronto, please go see productions and listen to the recordings, because as we were talking about, they exist for people who are not in those physical spaces as well. And so, one more time, thank you, everybody.
So that's all for this episode. You've been listening to the Classical Queer Podcast, and Jake and I look forward to being with you next month. The incidental music is courtesy of Jared Miller, and the show was produced by Samantha Jane.